In 30 BC, when Roman soldiers stormed Cleopatra's chamber, they found Egypt's last pharaoh dead. But she wasn't alone. 2 women lay beside her, lifeless. Their names were Iras and Charmion, her most trusted servants. For centuries, historians have romanticized their loyal suicide. But the truth about what these women endured, and the fate of Cleopatra's other servants, is far darker than any Hollywood movie has ever shown you. Today, we're uncovering the horrifying reality of serving the last pharaoh of Egypt. A story of manipulation, forced loyalty, and a fate that history deliberately buried. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about Cleopatra's legendary death. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this channel dives deep into the historical truths they don't teach in school. To understand the horror of their ending, we must first understand their beginning. Being chosen as Cleopatra's personal servant might sound like an honor, and in many ways it was. These weren't ordinary slaves. They were educated, refined, and given access to luxuries most Egyptians could never dream of. Iras served as Cleopatra's hairdresser and cosmetics expert. In ancient Egypt, this wasn't just about vanity. Appearance was power, politics, and religious symbolism all wrapped into one. Charmion was even more crucial. She managed Cleopatra's wardrobe and acted as a trusted advisor. But here's what history books conveniently skip over. These women had no choice. They were selected as children, sometimes as young as 7 or 8 years old, taken from their families and molded into the perfect servants. Their entire lives were designed around one person's needs. Ancient sources tell us that Cleopatra's personal servants underwent years of training. They learned multiple languages: Greek, Latin, Egyptian, and sometimes Persian. They studied poetry, music, and the art of conversation because Cleopatra didn't just want servants. She wanted living accessories that enhanced her image. But proximity to power came with a terrifying price. These servants saw everything, every political scheme, every secret meeting, every moment of vulnerability. And in the ancient world, witnesses were liabilities. Roman historian Plutarch mentions that Cleopatra's inner circle was bound by something more powerful than loyalty: fear. They knew too much. If they ever left her service, they would be silenced, one way or another. There was no retirement plan for those who served pharaohs. You either died in service or died to protect their secrets. And Cleopatra had many secrets to protect. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony weren't just romantic entanglements. They were desperate political gambits to save Egypt from Roman annexation. Her servants facilitated these affairs, carried secret messages, and witnessed negotiations that could never be made public. Imagine living every day knowing that your value was measured entirely by your discretion. One slip of the tongue, one overheard conversation reported to the wrong person, and you wouldn't just lose your position, you'd lose your life. Now, while Iras and Charmion are the famous ones, Cleopatra employed dozens of personal servants. So where are their stories? Where did they go? The answer is more disturbing than you might expect. Recent archaeological evidence from Alexandria gives us clues. Excavations near what historians believe was Cleopatra's palace complex have revealed mass burial sites from around 30 BC, the year of her death. The bodies show signs of sudden, violent death, not from battle, from execution. When Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, conquered Egypt, he didn't just take the throne. He systematically eliminated anyone who could legitimize a future Egyptian uprising. And that included Cleopatra's household. Ancient records mention that Octavian ordered the cleansing of the royal household. This wasn't a mass deportation. This was extermination. Servants who had served Cleopatra for decades, who had done nothing but their duties, were rounded up and killed simply because they had been close to her. The Romans were practical in their cruelty. They understood that servants heard things: battle strategies, diplomatic secrets, hidden wealth locations. Octavian couldn't risk this information spreading, so he eliminated the risk entirely. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. Cleopatra had servant families living within the palace complex. When the Romans came, they didn't discriminate by age. Historical accounts from the period mention that the household was dealt with comprehensively. Think about what that means. Children who happened to be born to palace servants, who had committed no crime except existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, were caught in this purge. There's a Roman accounting document from 29 BC, just 1 year after Cleopatra's death, that lists expenditures for the disposal of the Egyptian household. It's bureaucratic language for mass murder. The document is coldly efficient, listing numbers of people by age category and the costs associated with their executions. We also need to talk about Cleopatra's eunuch servants, men who had been castrated specifically to serve in the royal household. This was common practice in ancient courts. These men were considered safe around the queen and were often entrusted with the most sensitive duties. When Octavian took control, these eunuchs faced a particularly cruel fate. They couldn't blend back into society. Their physical condition marked them as palace servants. Roman sources mention they were disposed of because they were unnatural and corrupted by Egyptian excess. This wasn't just political execution. It was cultural genocide disguised as cleanup. Now let's return to Iras and Charmion, because their famous loyal suicide deserves serious scrutiny. According to Plutarch and other ancient historians, when Cleopatra decided to end her life, these two devoted servants chose to die with her out of pure loyalty. It's a beautiful story. It's been painted by countless artists, dramatized in plays and films. Two faithful women, so devoted to their queen that they couldn't imagine living without her. But here's the question no one asks. Did they actually have a choice? Let's look at the evidence more critically. When Roman soldiers entered the chamber, they found Cleopatra already dead. Iras was dead at her feet. Charmion was dying, barely able to adjust Cleopatra's crown one final time before collapsing. Ancient sources describe this as the ultimate act of devotion. But consider the alternative interpretation. What if they were silenced? Cleopatra knew she was about to die, either by her own hand or by Roman execution. She had spent weeks negotiating with Octavian, trying to save her children, trying to preserve some dignity in defeat. She knew the Romans would interrogate everyone in her household. These servants knew everything, every secret, every hidden treasure, every compromising detail about her relationships with Caesar and Antony. In death, they couldn't be tortured for information. Here's another detail that doesn't quite add up: the timing. If all three women took poison simultaneously, they should have died around the same time. Yet sources clearly state that Cleopatra died first, then Iras, then Charmion, with enough time for Charmion to still be conscious when soldiers arrived. This suggests either different doses or administration at different times. Why would loyal servants delay their own deaths, unless they weren't entirely willing participants? Some historians have proposed that Cleopatra gave them a choice. Take the poison now or face Roman interrogation and torture later. That's not really a choice. It's coercion dressed as loyalty. The most haunting detail comes from Plutarch himself. When a Roman soldier asked the dying Charmion if this was well done, she supposedly replied, "It is well done, and fitting for a princess descended from so many royal kings." Read that again carefully. She doesn't say, "I chose this" or "I wanted this." She says it's fitting for Cleopatra. It's a statement about duty and inevitability, not choice. In her final breath, Charmion was still performing her role as the perfect servant, saying exactly what history expected her to say. The truly horrifying part? We celebrate this as loyalty. We romanticize their deaths as noble sacrifice. But nobility requires choice, and these women may never have had one. Cleopatra's household wasn't unique. This pattern of servant sacrifice was common throughout the ancient world, and understanding this broader context makes their fate even more disturbing. In ancient Egypt, servant sacrifice had deep roots. During earlier dynasties, when pharaohs died, some servants were killed and buried with them to serve in the afterlife. By Cleopatra's time, this practice had officially ended, but the mentality behind it hadn't. The Romans had their own version. When wealthy Romans died, it wasn't uncommon for certain slaves to be killed, either as part of funeral rites or to prevent them from revealing family secrets. There's documented legal debate in Rome about whether masters had the right to order slaves to commit suicide. The answer, disturbingly, was often yes. Emperor Augustus, the same Octavian who conquered Egypt, later passed laws trying to limit these practices, but he did so only after securing power. His cleanup of Cleopatra's household happened before his moral reformation became politically useful. Modern psychologists who study coercive control and Stockholm Syndrome have looked at these historical accounts with new perspective. When you raise someone from childhood to believe their entire purpose is serving another person, when you isolate them from outside relationships, when you make them dependent on one person for everything, that's not creating loyalty. That's creating psychological captivity. Iras and Charmion didn't just serve Cleopatra. They had no identity separate from her. Their entire sense of self was constructed around being her servants. When she died, they may have genuinely believed they had no reason to continue living. That's not beautiful devotion. That's the result of systematic psychological conditioning. Before you think this is just ancient history, consider this. Human trafficking survivors today describe similar psychological patterns. When someone controls every aspect of your life from childhood, when they're your only source of food, shelter, and identity, you develop what psychologists call trauma bonding. Victims often defend their abusers, even express love for them. From the outside, it looks like loyalty. From the inside, it's survival adaptation. The ancient world didn't have words for these concepts, but the human psychology was the same. Cleopatra's servants may have truly believed they wanted to die with her, but that belief was the product of a lifetime of conditioning that left them no psychological alternative. Here's one more disturbing detail. Roman records mention that after Cleopatra's death, her tomb was sealed quickly, unusually quickly. Some historians suggest this was to prevent her from becoming a martyr. But there's another possibility. If other servants were killed in or near her chambers, disposing of the evidence quickly would have been priority. A queen dying dramatically is one thing. A massacre of unarmed servants is harder to justify even in victory. Archaeological teams have requested permission to excavate the suspected tomb sites for decades. Egyptian authorities have been reluctant, citing preservation concerns. But one has to wonder, what might they find? How many bodies are actually in there? So why don't we hear this version of events? Why do textbooks and documentaries continue to present the romantic version of loyal servants dying for their beloved queen? The answer is uncomfortable. History is written by those in power, and those in power prefer stories that justify existing hierarchies. If we acknowledge that Iras and Charmion were victims, that their choice was manufactured by a lifetime of conditioning and coercion, then we have to acknowledge that the entire system of ancient servitude was fundamentally abusive. We have to admit that much of what we celebrate as loyalty in historical accounts was actually survival behavior under oppression. That's not a narrative that powerful people historically wanted to promote. Rome went on to build an empire dependent on slavery. They needed stories of happy slaves, loyal slaves, slaves who loved their masters. The tale of Cleopatra's devoted servants served that purpose perfectly. By the Renaissance, Cleopatra's story had been thoroughly romanticized. Artists painted beautiful scenes of noble sacrifice. Playwrights wrote dramatic monologues of devotion. Shakespeare's version, written 1,600 years after the events, cemented the romantic interpretation for English-speaking audiences. Each retelling filed away the uncomfortable edges. Each adaptation made the servants more willing, more noble, more perfectly loyal. The possibility of coercion, fear, or systematic abuse gradually disappeared from the narrative. Modern historians face a dilemma. We have limited sources about ancient events, and most were written by elite men who had particular perspectives and biases. When sources like Plutarch present servant suicide as noble loyalty, do we take that at face value? Or do we read between the lines, considering what might have been too uncomfortable for ancient authors to acknowledge? Increasingly, historians are choosing the second approach. They're asking questions about power dynamics, psychological coercion, and whose voices are missing from historical records. This doesn't mean inventing facts. but it does mean critically examining the assumptions embedded in our sources. The servants in Cleopatra's household left almost no direct evidence. No journals, no letters, no recorded statements beyond what their masters allowed. Their silence in the historical record isn't neutral. It's evidence of their powerlessness. The horrifying fate of Cleopatra's servants isn't just about ancient history. It's about how we tell history and whose suffering we choose to romanticize. Iras and Charmion have been celebrated for 2,000 years as paragons of loyalty. But loyalty requires freedom, and these women had none. They were taken as children, trained to have no identity beyond service, and died in circumstances that may not have been entirely their choice. The dozens of other servants who disappeared from historical records, executed, buried in unmarked graves, their very existence erased, remind us that for every famous historical figure, there were countless unnamed people whose suffering made that person's story possible. We don't know all their names. We don't know their dreams, their fears, or whether they resented their fate or accepted it. History took their voices, but we can do something history didn't. We can acknowledge that their story is more complex than simple devotion. We can recognize that systems of servitude, ancient or modern, create conditions where choice becomes meaningless. And we can honor them not by celebrating their deaths as noble sacrifice, but by honestly examining the forces that made those deaths inevitable. The next time you hear a story about loyal servants dying for their masters, ask yourself, were they truly loyal, or did they simply have no alternative? The answer might be more disturbing than you think. If this video opened your eyes to a darker side of history, make sure to like and subscribe. We post new content every week uncovering the truths that history tried to bury. And let me know in the comments, what other noble historical stories do you think deserve re-examination? Until next time, keep questioning everything.